scrabbling frantically for purchase, whether they were on their way into the hold as keepers or over the side and back into the Bering Sea. At Kate's shout, he looked up. She held up a hand, rubber-gloved fingers splayed, and jerked a thumb aft toward the cabin. He scowled, his hands barely checking. "You just went!" Kate was soaked through to the skin and chilled through to the bone. Hunger had been gnawing on her for so long that her stomach felt like it was about to crawl up her esophagus. Her first knee-jerk response to the deck boss's terse comment was anatomically impossible. Her second, sociologically taboo, both eminently satisfactory. She opened her mouth, and a sheet of spray slapped her in the face, no bigger or harder than any such, over the last week, but enough to ring two faces up before her eyes, side by side, wearing identical accusatory expressions, a macabre jackpot in a hellish casino. Christopher Alcala and Stuart Brown. That's all. Just two faces staring out at her from Jack Morgan's bulging file folder. Christopher Alcala, a thin, pale, ascetic's face, with big brown bedroom eyes, dark hair falling into them. He reminded Kate of her cousin Martin, when Martin was sober. And Stuart Brown, all fair curls and laughing eyes and wide grin. He looked cuddly, like an overstuffed teddy bear, and almost that mature. Both Alcala and Brown had disappeared off the deck of the very ship upon which she was currently standing, more or less, not 6 months before, during the last fishing season. She was working Brown's spot. Both of them very probably dead. Both of them just 21 years old. Kate looked at the mocking expression of the deck boss who had been on board when Alcala and Brown disappeared, and who may or may not have assisted in said disappearance, and let the furious words back up in her throat until she thought she might strangle on them. But it wasn't her job to tell the deck boss where he could get off, preferably into 500 fathoms of North Pacific Ocean, 500 miles from Dutch Harbor, although if God was good, that would come with time. No, she was casual labor for the Anchorage district attorney, for a price, and it was her job to find out what had happened to those two very young men. And Jack Morgan, one-time boss, part-time lover, and full-time chief investigator for the Anchorage district attorney, was paying her $500 a day, $100 over his usual fee, to let the deck boss of this happy ship dump on her, if such was his pleasure. $100 extra was what it took to get her back on the deck of a boat again, and she knew a moment of bitter regret that it hadn't taken more, a lot more. She took a deep breath, inhaling a little spindrift along the way, and sneezed. It knocked her off balance, and she slipped on a deck that rejoiced in maintaining a surface halfway between ice and slime. "Shit!" she yelled, and caught at the railing on her way down. Her hip hit hard. The rubberized plastic of her rain gear caught and almost tore. She was back on her feet in an instant. An unfriendly grin split the bearded face of the deck boss. Kate flipped him off, and he gave a short bark of laughter. "I'm going to grab something to eat," she yelled over the sound of the waves. He shrugged and gave a grudging nod. She groped hand over hand across the tilting deck to the galley's starboard door and fought her way inside. The boat heeled over into the downside of a swell, and Kate waited, bracing herself against the bulkhead, until the Avilda righted herself and began a swing in the opposite direction. Using the listing motion as impetus, she staggered across the galley floor, barely catching the handle of a cupboard with one wildly flailing hand. Drawing herself upright, she reached in and pulled out a box of Cheerios. Great. Oat bran. Just what she needed. Food the manufacturer swore wouldn't give her cancer. Might even, in fact, cure it. At the moment, developing a nice little inoffensive cancer somewhere on dry land seemed infinitely preferable to what she was grimly convinced was soon to be her death by drowning, way too far out at sea. But they were the first edible thing that came to hand. They were calories. So far as she knew, there were no moose steaks on board, and in the prevailing seas, she wouldn't have been able to keep a frying pan on the stove long enough to cook them anyway. Bracing herself against the continuing pitch and roll of the deck beneath her, she raised the box, tilted her head back, and caught a stream of cereal in her mouth. She chewed and swallowed and repeated the process. Tossing the box back into the cupboard and latching the door, she waited for the roll of the ship to be with her and staggered 2 steps to the refrigerator.